Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast, the #1 source for news, analysis, and discussion on the Detroit Red Wings, the NHL, and all things hockey. Here are your hosts, Ryan Hanna, Brad Crisco, and Evan Lopsinger.
Made some people nervous when I suggested it, but I do think that if you win against Pittsburgh in overtime, in Pittsburgh, you have to hit the gritty if you're the Red Wings. Seider and Edvinsson doing that, being 6 foot a million, is a bit risky. I don't know that he had the coordination to do it, but man, I do think it would have been worth the meme.
I feel like had they come back from 2-0 down, it would be justifiable. Having blown the 2-0 lead, that might be pushing it a bit.
That would really upset some very old people in the NHL.
Well, also people who just watched Jake Wellman get traded away with a second. And so they're probably like, let's not risk that with Seider and Edvinsson. Big win. Simon ending it was great. People thought it was Michael Rasmussen at first. That broadcast was an interesting sensory experience.
I'm not exaggerating. I've made this joke with other broadcasts before, but that actually was legitimately the first game I watched the majority of it on mute. Like the audio delay I could not handle. I turned the volume off and just watched it in silence.
So one of our Patreon supporters actually wrote in the episode thread for this episode, and they gave us some information. And we've heard this similar thing in the past, but when this kind of thing happens, you know what the cause is? It's the board ads. Because of, I'm oversimplifying a process that I don't completely understand, but basically the board ads have to be like processed and run through different systems and color corrected and then sent back to the feed and everything aligned. And basically it all has to be set up way ahead of time. And if something's out of whack, it's not easy to correct in real time. So I'm sure that the talented people at TNT were watching that and like pulling out their hair, but it's because of the board ads. So in case you had this glowing impression of those board ads since the NHL put them in, the digital board ads.
People asked for them.
Gary Bettman told us people actually like them.
They do.
I always say my day is better knowing that I get to tune into an NHL game and see digitally imposed moving board ads.
I like regional advertisements.
Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast, folks. Here to talk to you about all things Detroit Red Wings hockey, a win, the world of the NHL, and lots more. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Hanna.
I'm Brad Crisco.
And I'm Evan.
On this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, we are going to talk about Detroit's game against the Pittsburgh Penguins, the great start that they had, Berggren finally breaking through alongside his line mates Kasper and Tarasenko, the power play staying hot, Kane showing up across the game, Cam Talbot being the absolute truth in Seider and Edvinsson's OT winner. We'll talk more about different takeaways from the game in terms of performances from Berggren and Talbot and what to expect ahead. And speaking of what's coming up, the road trip that Detroit has and what they need to do to stay in the race. More NHL and Red Wings notes after the break, including Husso, Danielson's play in Grand Rapids, some former Red Wings in the news, and then more on the Hall of Fame induction of Pavel Datsyuk and what to expect ahead for other potential Red Wings inductees. And then a lot of NHL news, actually. Pittsburgh is having a fire sale, and I guess we're all pretending to be surprised by that. Different potential right-handed D targets across the league that are younger and struggling where they are, coaching targets that are coming up as the coaching carousel is likely to start up pretty soon, and more as we head into overtime. Before all that, I want to let you know of two things. First, the Winged Wheel Podcast is primarily supported by our Patreon supporters. Patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast. If you want to support the show, you get access to benefits like our bonus overtime episodes and any bonus content we create, our Patreon exclusive Winged Wheel Podcast Discord, and you're automatically entered into all of our giveaways. We give away 2 tickets to every Detroit Red Wings home game, the vast majority going directly to our Patreon supporters. So again, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast. Secondly, Winged Wheel Podcast Night in partnership with the Grand Rapids Griffins. Yes, we do 2 a year with the Detroit Red Wings, but also with the Grand Rapids Griffins. Saturday, January 18th, the live show before the game at Van Andel Arena, tickets to the game, and a officially co-branded Griffins and Winged Wheel Podcast gray beanie as shown off by Sebastian Cosa, who is the real controller of the flow of the hats. So griffinshockey.com/WWP. Those tickets are going fast. Detroit wins in Pittsburgh. This one, I'm not going to say completely, but you remember last year how we were going with just win? Like, just win, baby. It doesn't matter how pretty it is. That's all you have to do. It had some of those vibes. And the difference with last year now is last year Detroit was scoring an insane amount, way more than expected. It was a lot of fun, even if defense was a myth on the Red Wings. It was at least fun. So I don't want to say that's the vibe this year, but this game had a little bit of a just win feeling to it, yeah?
Yeah, I think so. After the absolute frustration they had in the last game against the Rangers, where they win that game 99 times out of 100 outside of a poor shooting performance combined with an insane goalie performance. Then they come out in this game and they dominate the Penguins in the first period, and it was still sitting 0-0. It had that there's no way you can let this one slip away again vibe to it.
The thing is, these two teams seem to be on the same level to me. Like, both of them struggling in their own way. Both of them are not meeting the expectations that they were hoping to for the season and have questions about how they're going to construct their team going forward. I do think Pittsburgh's more on the downturn than Detroit because there's no cupboard. If you think things are bad in Detroit for the future, look at Pittsburgh. They have the 3 cups. So you take that deal 10 times out of 10, no matter who you're a fan of. So it made sense that this was going to be a close match game. The shots ended up pretty close, 33-31 for Pittsburgh. That is not at all anything to cry about if you're a Red Wings fan. And like you said, Brad, that first period was a great showing by Detroit. They found their footing. They were getting opportunities. It wasn't a perfect period, but by and large, that was an extension of what you saw against the Rangers. That didn't hold in the second and third, though. Before we get into the goals, just the flow of the game, you did see Pittsburgh kind of take over, and Detroit did enough to hold things off. Talbot especially did enough to hold off the best of the chances, but Pittsburgh did grab hold of that game.
Yeah, the flow was interesting would be the polite way to put it. Concerning would be the other angle to take on that, because as good as the Red Wings were, we'll call it the first half of that game, the wheels fell off pretty quickly, and there was a shift where Petrie and Hull were for some reason out there together, and did not take Pittsburgh long to tie the game when that happened. And I felt like Newsy was leaning on the Sherratt-Petrie pairing a lot. I noticed they were on with the Larkin line a bunch, which was not a formula for success in the defensive zone. And I think it came back to bite him. That being said, Hull and Gustafsson didn't look much better. So again, this whole conundrum of how much can you play Seider and Edvinsson? And when it's not 30 minutes a game, this is the result that's going to happen. Not that they lost or it was close to a loss because of it, but just because, 30 to 40 minutes of the game, you're going to have to hold on for dear life, depending which defensive pairings out there. And, it was one bad rush against Seider where he got absolutely torched, and then one fire sale in the D zone where Hull and Petrie blew coverage, and all of a sudden it's a completely different game. And like you said, the flow is probably the right word, completely flipped on its head.
Let's talk about how the game went down. So it was Detroit who did actually strike first, which I think was key. You tweeted this out during the game, Brad. After all that pressure, it's okay to leave the first period tied 0-0, but you don't want to succumb to the first goal based on what we've seen from the Red Wings and what we were talking about right now. The game tends to unravel when it gets away from them. They haven't shown that fortitude this year to kind of keep it in reins. So Berggren got his first goal of the year, which was massive. And it was, Kasper didn't factor into the goal, but it did feel like a line rush goal. Tarasenko carrying it up the right side, Kasper driving the defenders in deep, doing what he does well, and Berggren burying from that left side, making no mistake from his clear shot that he had. And oh man, I was so close to making a Zadina joke because you had already mentioned that game that he's been snake bitten. It's like, what does he need to do for this to go in? And I was like, oh no, we said this before. A couple of years ago or whenever with Zadina, and I'm afraid we're going down the same path. It was nice to see Berggren net one.
Don't worry, when I made that joke about Berggren needing to break the curse, there was enough Zadina mentions in the comments. You didn't have to. That being said, it's probably worth mentioning. Zadina was brought into the NHL where his strength as a hockey player was as a shooter and a goal scorer. So when he wasn't scoring, that was deeply concerning. Berggren's weakest part of his offensive game has always been his shot. He's a playmaker. He's a crafty player. He can get goals, but he's not the guy that's going to rip from the outside. So Berggren's shot and being a little snake bitten is a little more understandable than it was for Zadina. So I'm less concerned, because even though it was great to see him break through with an actual goal this game, he's been playing well for a long stretch now. So there's not a lot of concern for me around him. I've actually been pleasantly surprised by how well he's been playing. But yeah, it's huge just to have that dam breaker go in the net where it's like, all right, monkey's off the back. I'm not playing with the pressure anymore. And hopefully he can continue that into a streak of actual counting stats for the next little while.
It's interesting with Berggren, Tarasenko, and Kasper because the narrative on the three of them is so different. Tarasenko is getting the most heat right now, and I think justifiably. You're a veteran who's brought in to say, hey, we know you're not like the massive physical force down low anymore, but you should still have your offense. And the production hasn't really been there. Kasper, who everyone's just happy to see him here, and he's doing the right things, and the production's going to come. And Berggren, who's kind of in the middle of the two, where it's like, you know, okay, you wanted the spot, and you've been in the system for a little while now, and you showed scoring in the NHL before. You've shown a lot of production in the AHL, so you love him or hate him, you know and acknowledge that he has to be seizing control of this spot. All three of them as a line have been producing a lot of really great opportunities over this last handful of games. Not perfect. I'm not saying they've been great at 200 feet. Like, of course, there's going to be flaws when you're, a middling team at best, like the Red Wings are right now. But them breaking through, I thought, was an important takeaway from this game. It's the kind of thing where it's like one game doesn't make a season, but if you're going to have any strong takeaways in a win, that's the kind of narrative you wanted. Speaking of narrative, the power play is continuing its narrative as Patriock Kane scored wide open on the power play. And it was really, really great work battling for the puck from first Raymond and then Larkin to get the puck over to Kane, who made no mistake. And, Patriock Kane, as we see how his game has progressed from, who he used to be, and as he's getting older and coming off his surgery and whatnot, his 5-on-5 numbers this year haven't been good. And if you look at that from afar, you think, oh, concerning. But then you see what he's contributing on the power play. And even if he's just getting warmed up to the season, these are the kinds of things you want to see.
That goal was funny because it was a good illustration of Pittsburgh's struggles this year. Because, I follow a couple of Penguins beat writers, like I do for most teams. And I think it was Jesse Marshall just posted a screenshot of 4 Penguins PKers on the left side of the ice, Patriock Kane wide open in front. And he goes, you think any of the players on the ice realize that's Patriock Kane, who he is, what he can do?
It's like the Red Wings penalty kill.
It was fun being on the other side of one of those memes for a change. But yeah, that was a Johnny Hustle type goal. The Penguins should not have let that happen. But when those opportunities present, you got to win some puck battles. And Larkin did a phenomenal job of getting it over to Kane, which if you watch the way Kane shot, that was actually a trickier goal than you would think because he was in so tight. He almost opened up the blade of his stick like a wedge, which is really hard to make solid contact with.
Go on.
Well, welcome, Evan.
Hello.
And just essentially chipped it up over Nedeljkovic. So an easy goal in terms of he's standing wide open in front and they got him the puck, but still a deft little touch to actually beat the goalie with it.
The kind of puck that comes to you where if that was an average Joe in that position, like I would have fallen over trying to shoot that puck, maybe.
Yeah, I wouldn't have scored that.
It's going right into the pads.
Yes. Yeah. So that was Detroit up 2-0. And as you mentioned, Brad, defensive breakdowns or just, flat out Pittsburgh getting through and controlling the game. First Rust and then Beauvillier scored. So we entered the second period tied and we left the second period tied. First 0-0 and then 2-2. And then nothing after that, despite Pittsburgh controlling a lot of the play and Detroit not really converting, well, definitely not converting on anything. They had moments where they kind of stymied Pittsburgh, but Cam Talbot was just massive throughout the game. I think it was 31 saves in the end. I hate when they mess with the shot totals after the game. It's so annoying because I know for a fact Pittsburgh ended with 34 and now it's like, just leave it alone.
It's the Islanders game. I had so many 10-shot jokes after that game just for them to add that 11th shot like an hour later. So it was annoying. Jarring.
There's a pun in there for someone funnier than me. Cam Talbot makes a massive save in overtime Puck turns around, goes the other way. Patriock Kane does a nice job to get it to DeBrincat, who from down low feeds Seider and Edvinsson in front. And Seider and Edvinsson, like, that was a fast...
that was a shooter's goal.
Yeah, like, don't be fooled by how fast that went in. That wasn't just like he closed his eyes and slapped it. Like, he dragged that thing in and pulled it. He made the defender get out of his way. He moved the goalie a little bit. That was Seider and Edvinsson reminding us that he was drafted as an offensively minded defenseman.
Is there a smoother goal that you can score in hockey than the pull back and release as a defenseman is sliding past you? Frame those. I love those so much.
As long as it's not Jeff Petrie doing it, I like them too.
Does the Jeff Petrie toe drag, donation count if he is being toe dragged, Evan?
No, because then I'll be very broke.
Well, as a defenseman who's definitely never been the defenseman sliding across a toe drag, don't ever accuse me of
never.
that. Yeah, that is like a defenseman's nightmare to be on that clip, but good for Seider and Edvinsson. And to do it from how tall he is, like, I like that was a national feed game because you saw a good smattering of people going, whoa, Edvinson's hands are silky. And it's like, yeah, always have been, brother.
Yeah, Seider had a rough game, but this is the beauty of having someone like Seider and Edvinsson. It didn't really matter all that much because you have two elite D on the ice at all times. So as long as one of them is functioning at the top of their game, you're probably going to be all right.
Seider having a rough game does not equal automatic loss anymore. And that's the importance of Edvinsson and how good he's been for the Red Wings. And you can have a rough game and still have an altogether good game because your pairing, your partner is helping elevate you. So that's Detroit 3-2 overtime win. Was it perfect? No. Was it pretty? Sometimes yes, but for a lot of the game, no. But this to me is like, if and when the Red Wings are going to win this season, this is how you want to see it. They are going to show up where they can show up, which is on the power play. They got actual scoring from their depth, which is huge. And, their best players contributed. And, it's not like everything was solved for Detroit. You still have questions of where's the 5-on-5 offense. You still have questions of, is Lucas Raymond going to start scoring? You still have questions of how bad is this defense if you take away Edvinsson and Seider? But that doesn't matter because they did enough this game and they won against a team they should win against, where that's what Detroit, if they want to stay in this race and slowly figure things out over the season, these are the results they need. I want to talk about a few of these takeaways. First, Cam Talbot. Man, I joked, I think last episode of the one before, Cam Talbot's not going to be out here getting Vezina votes. That's very close to not even being a joke anymore. He is. How much of the Kings' performance was him versus the defensive system? I think we're overrating how much was the defensive system. A lot of it was for sure, but he's been just rock solid. And he's been getting a lot of use too. I'm not saying he's been worn down to the bone, but it's not like he's been, left on the bench for a lot of games to rest.
He's the argument for why you don't pay a goalie $10 million because they're getting Vezina level goaltending for $2.5 million, which is huge. I don't think the Vezina thing is likely, but there's a couple things that
don't take that seriously.
But I might take it seriously.
He's fourth in save percentage in the NHL.
But what do you have to, I remember the conversation someone was having preseason in terms of the NFL. What do you have to win the MVP? You have to be relevant, so the Red Wings got to be hanging around the playoff race for that to happen. You have to have national attention, national games, which the Red Wings have a decent amount of this year, and you have to have a storyline. Well, Cam Talbot's storyline could be drags this team that can't score into the playoffs, but also if you want to sort by save percentages and nationalities, he might be Canada's starter for the Four Nations faceoff right now, which would put him right at the forefront of everybody's minds in terms of top end goaltenders, because I don't care how bad Canada's goaltending is as a group. And when you look at the candidates right now and everybody outside of Talbot, how they're performing, it's bleak. But if you're Canada's starting goalie, you're a top end goalie because it's Team Canada. So all of a sudden you have this formula coupled with his performance early on going, you know what? Cam Talbot might be getting a lot of attention as this season goes on if this holds up.
If Connor Hellebuyck wasn't having the season he is currently having, I would definitely entertain more of this conversation. If the season ended right now, he would absolutely garner a ton of votes. There's no doubt about it. But I mean,
let's wait until after game 82.
Yeah. What game are we in?
15, 16,
16 games. Yeah. But for the start of the season, Cam Talbot is coming as advertised and a lot more.
Team MVP so far.
Absolutely.
And look, Lyon has been good too. So it's not like just Talbot. It's not like, when Lyon came in and was the only goaltender consistently doing anything when he started with the Red Wings when they finally brought him in last season. So Detroit is in, we've said this so many times, for all the deficiencies they've had, the goaltending has allowed them to figure out their team defense as the season has gone on. And I'll talk about that in a second here. They've allowed them to kind of get Edvinsson up to speed. They've allowed them to kind of maybe get some line combinations that hopefully are going to start working here. If you think about the Berggren, Tarasenko, Kasper line, the goaltending is the reason. I don't care how good any other player it has been, including Simon Edvinsson and Mo Seider. The goaltending is the reason Detroit is not writing off this season already. Plain and simple.
There was a sneaky stat that came up yesterday, though.
Yeah, do you want me to read it out?
Yeah, go for it, because, I think it was Travis Yost posted these, and it was surprising in good and bad ways.
So, call it surprising or not, in terms of goals for per 60 and expected goals for per 60 for offense, defense, power play, and penalty kill. Detroit's offense, their actual goals for per 60 is league worst, 32 out of 32 going into the Pittsburgh game. Expected goals for per 60 is 31-32. So there's no big disparity there. They're performing about as the on-ice product should dictate.
Yeah, and for those, because when I tweeted about this, there were questions in the mentions. Actual goals are exactly what they sound, the pucks that go in the net. Expected goals is basically a summary of chances. How many goals should you have scored based on the chances you have generated or given up?
And before people, put too much stock into this, I just want to say expected goals and that whole, it depends on the model that's using it, how they count it. And I do find it's better as a broad, like accrued stat rather than looking at a micro level for any individual game or play, because it just doesn't do a good enough job yet in my mind of factoring in a lot of different dynamic parts of the play, no matter how hard it tries. It is a useful tool, but it can't be the only thing you look at. Moving on. For defense, goals against per 60, Detroit is 7th in the NHL. And that's not an aberration because the expected value is 9th in the NHL. So Detroit is one of the top 10 at worst team defense teams. And that expected goals, we're not talking about goaltending there. Team defense is top 10 in the league. So that has actually come around for Detroit as their game plan has taken shape. It's carried a lot by the top pair on defense that plays most of their minutes. But in terms of what the forwards are doing as well, the system might bore you to hell, but it is accomplishing that, and that deserves credit.
Yeah, for all the Lalonde's job might be at risk talk that's going around there, that's a pretty good stat in terms of defending him. Because, again, look at the bottom four defense on this team. And he's thrown out a top 10 defense at 5-on-5 right now. That's impressive. That's the system working. Are the goalies playing elite? Yeah, but that's the difference between expected and actual. The goalies have bumped them 2 spots higher in actual versus expected, as you would expect with good goaltending. So the Red Wings aren't giving up a ton of high-quality chances, and the goalies are overperforming those high-quality chances they are getting.
And the specials teams aren't surprising. Power play, Detroit is 7th in terms of actual production. Expected is 3rd. So that power play that we've been talking about, they are hot and they have stayed hot, and it's a top tier, upper echelon in the NHL power play. And you said it a little while ago here, Brad. Best players are on the ice. There's other elements that factor into that, but Detroit's top players are genuinely very good, and they have figured out something on the power play where it's working. And then penalty kill is, as we're all watching, expected and actual goals against per 60, 30th and 30th. It is among the league's worst.
There's your criticism of Lalonde, because how do you have that good of a 5-on-5 defense and that poor of a power play? It doesn't make sense. I understand it a little more from the 5-on-5 offense to the power play, just because the Red Wings literally only have about 5 good offensive players. So you throw them all in at the same time. You don't get to do that during the game, and forwards don't play as much as defense. But yeah, the penalty kill, that is something that can and absolutely should be fixed with the tools they're working with.
I think you can't ever shake that this kind of system is, you just want to claw your eyes out when you watch it. Let's call that what it is. It's not fun to watch, but if the power play is firing, And defense isn't going to be easy to fix. I'm going to harp on this until the roster changes. Like, thank goodness for Edvinsson and Seider being as good as they are, where they can cover for all the rest of the holes, and then the team defense covers for the rest. And that's part of why the offense isn't, fun to watch, because it's so focused on making sure you don't get buried when you have anyone other than Seider and Edvinsson on the ice. And still, that's not perfect. Again, the goalies are helping a lot, but the team defense deserves to be celebrated. It genuinely has turned into a really good thing. I like what you said, Brad. Like, if you're going to criticize Lalonde, you have to also acknowledge that this is part of the reason why they're getting these results. For the goalies being as good as they are too, yes, but you don't even have the opportunity for a goalie to save a game if you've let in 6 or 7 because you're succumbing to your bad defensive roster that's been given to you. If they can fix their penalty kill, and I maintain this from last episode, that's something most any team in the NHL can do. If you can fix your penalty kill to just be league average, these results are going to be scarily close to what you saw last year in terms of, hey, Detroit's in this hunt. This road trip ahead, when we'll talk in a minute here about what expectations are, but this road trip ahead is a good opportunity. It's a test because you're on the road and you have a back-to-back, but you're playing at least 2 weak teams, and then you have the Kings on Saturday. So you have Anaheim, the Kings, and then on Monday you have San Jose. If you can get this rolling a little bit and you can start to figure out that penalty kill, Detroit is not that far off from pulling themselves out of the bottom tier of the league conversation.
Yeah, it's a huge, huge opportunity. And the one thing, too, that we should mention in terms of the playoff race, nobody's separating in the East right now. It's a very mediocre, mushy middle in the playoff race right now. So the Red Wings had a tough start. They've got an opportunity here. We're talking about how bad their 5-on-5 offense is. Not the last 2 games. They've been generating a lot. They've shown that within this system, they can generate pressure. The entire Rangers game, the first half of this Penguins game, that was, 90 minutes of sustained offensive pressure from this team, which we hadn't seen at any point this year outside of brief 5-minute stretches. So that's a huge, huge positive. Coupled with the defense, yeah, there's a formula here. Again, you don't want to handicap percentages here. It's not a super high percentage, but there's a formula here where the Red Wings drag themselves back into the driver's seat of a wild card spot.
It's like when Evan and I are playing match play and he gives me a stroke a hole. It's probably not enough, but on Evan's worst day, and if I'm having a good one, there's a chance I can make it interesting.
Exactly. There's always a chance. And right now they're only 1 point out of the wild card spot. So obviously it's still really early. Anything can happen. The Red Wings are maybe 1 injury away from devastation.
That's Evan Lobsinger speaking. If that jinxes anything, that is Evan Lobsinger.
No, that's not true. But you got to take the positives where you can. The Red Wings, they were bending last night, but they didn't break, and now they go on a West Coast road trip where points are available to them. They got to get them while they can and let the division shake out as it is. No, like Brad said, nobody's separating. They've got a good opportunity right now to jump up the standings.
Anaheim on Friday, 10 p.m. Eastern. If for anyone who's not watching Tyson Paul, I guess. The LA Kings the next night, not even 24 hours later, 22 hours later, 8 p.m. Eastern. And then on Monday, so we're going to be back with you on Sunday, but on Monday they have the San Jose Sharks at 10:30 p.m. Eastern, all on the road, all that West Coast road swing. They took points off Pittsburgh, 2 points off Pittsburgh, net 1 if you consider Pittsburgh in the race with them, which I don't know, Pittsburgh might be selling pretty soon here. Those 3 games against the West Coast teams, I'm not going to sit here and say they have to get 4, they have to get 5, they have to get 3. They don't have to do anything. It's so early in the season. And statistically, like Brad and Evan just said, things are extremely tight. No one has separated. So don't throw in the towel if things don't go well. If they lose and how they lose will be what dictates how you feel about it. But in terms of what you'd want to see from Detroit to continue to build on optimism from this episode, what should be the results here?
Well, we said, 2-1-1 in this 4-game stretch was the minimum. They've got 1. So 1-1-1. I can't change what I already said because I got to be fair. So 1-1-1 is the absolute bare minimum now from these next 3. Anaheim and San Jose are terrible. There's no way around it. Those are not good hockey teams, and they are not performing well. outside of Lucas Dostal, who, talking about Vezina dark horses, what he's doing in Anaheim this year is insane. And they're still losing. So I would say you have to beat Anaheim, San Jose, and then LA. Sure. With how they're playing, that's an understandable loss if it happens. But it's hockey. Things happen. So what would Lobsterdamus say here? They're going to beat LA and lose to the other two?
I didn't say that. But you guys are right. These are gettable points. They should be looking at 4 of 6 points minimum. Anaheim can't score goals, and San Jose is still horrific to watch. There's no excuse for them to not go in and just get those wins.
I want to see 3 or 4 points from the two terrible teams, Anaheim and San Jose. That's what I'm thinking. And that to me is enough where I'm satisfied, where you're like, yeah, 5 of 8 on this road trip is a fantastic result, especially for a team where you're already starting to do some scouting on next year's prospects. No, we're not starting the profiles, but don't be fooled. The work is already starting. So I would love to put that work to the side for a while, to put it lightly. But again, you're not going to hear us sit here and say, yeah, this offense is all of a sudden thrilling to watch. But there are signs that they can do what needs to be done and get up to the level of, yeah, this isn't a top-tier offensive team, but they're still able to show up like they did against New York and for part of the Pittsburgh game. The team defense is sorely underappreciated right now. Everyone knows how good this goaltending is. Everyone knows how good this power play is. If this PK can just do a little bit more, you're looking at potentially a different narrative for the Red Wings this season. Okay, we're going to take a quick break to hear from the sponsors of the Winged Wheel podcast, and we'll be back with you after this. There is nothing that compares to watching hockey live. It's not just about being closer to the action. It's hearing the sounds of the game, feeling the big hits along the boards. I personally will never forget how electric it was to be in the crowd for the last playoff win at the Joe. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to games or whatever concert or show you want to go to even easier. I went on the Game Time app to check out tickets for the Flyers at Red Wings game at the LCA on December 18th, and the tickets that really caught my eye were in their super deal category. $108 for lower bowl, 8 rows up from the ice. They also had deals in their amazing deal category like mezzanine seats from $60, and in their great deal category including upper bowl seats from just $22. Buying tickets on Game Time is by far the easiest, best experience I've had buying hockey or concert tickets. My personal favorite feature is the integrated seat views, giving you a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. I'm huge on trying out new spots around the arena and getting the most ideal seats possible for shows, so I use Game Time seat views constantly. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code WINGEDWHEEL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code WINGEDWHEEL, Winged Wheel, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. This episode of the Winged Wheel podcast is proudly brought to you by Labatt Blue Light. Created in 1983, this premium light Canadian Pilsner is a delicately balanced beer brewed with Cascade hops and a blend of malt. It's fresh, crisp, and brewed to the highest quality standards. There's a little bit of Canadian kindness in every sip of Labatt Blue Light. How did it get in there? They're Canadian. That's how. You can spread the love yourself by sharing a Labatt. And when you do share a Labatt, you're not just sharing a beer. You're sharing an experience that'll pair with anything from hockey to a hoedown. So next time you're watching hockey with your buds, be sure to share a Labatt, because while you might not all root for the same team, although we on this podcast do hope you're rooting for Detroit, you can all enjoy a Labatt Blue Light. We honestly love going to games in Detroit and seeing Labatt being the beer that fans clamor for all over the arena. It's a reliable beer, and it's great to have in your hand when celebrating a goal. So head to the link in the description of this episode or the one you see on your screen to find Labatt in stores near you today. You must be 21 or older, and as always, enjoy responsibly. Welcome back. Other Red Wings notes before we move on here. Ville Husso was sent back down to Grand Rapids after the Pittsburgh game. Shows signs of Alex Lyon's lower body thing being hopefully cleared and that we're going to see him on this road trip, which is good. We just got done talking about the back-to-back that Detroit has. The first against Anaheim, traveling across time zones, that's not going to be easy. The Red Wings are going to be on a 10:30 p.m. timeline in their own body clocks, and then the back-to-back with a team that's good with the LA Kings is not going to be easy less than 24 hours later. So you want Talbot and Lyon to both be able to go. So that's good for Detroit. Tough for Husso, but you don't mess with what's working in net. Other Red Wings notes. Did you guys see Nate Danielson's play down in Grand Rapids?
I did.
That was filthy.
He turned someone into the shadow realm.
You talk about a defenseman's nightmare. You're in your own zone and don't know which way is up after that. That's a tough scene.
Well, I think at one point the defenseman had turned and was facing one way as Danielson was moving the other way with the puck. So he turned around expecting to see Nate, and it was like he was a ghost.
I had a teammate once who got crossed up so bad. We had to play in this tournament where we went and played in a state that had no hitting. Like their leagues had no hitting, and which was stupid for the age that we were. Like, how do you... Anyways, they had no hitting. We couldn't hit in this tournament. And so we were forced to play these kids that were just pure danglers, all flash, all dazzle, extremely talented, but you couldn't hit them. And my teammate got crossed up so bad that he got turned around, was facing 180, was facing the bench in his own zone, just skated off. He's a defenseman and just skated off with it.
Oh, yeah.
That Danielson almost did that. That was a phenomenal play that turned into a goal for Grand Rapids. So the Grand Rapids storyline is still going. Former Red Wings, we're talking about future Red Wings. Former Red Wings, it's a tough time right now. Holy. Anthony Mantha, ACL surgery, out for the season. That's tough for him, who is, he's been trying to cement himself somewhere long-term for a while, and that's not going to help his case. And then Athanasiou on waivers clears because of his contract and the cap hit. Ugh.
What was the quote? Was it the coach or the GM said he needs to go down to match his play with his mindset or his confidence or something?
Wow. Just bury the guy on the way out.
Is he playing really good and has a poor mindset, or is it the other way around?
I think he has all the confidence in the world, but apparently it wasn't well founded.
The sick and twisted part about this is you could make a pretty good case to bring either of them back to Detroit given the circumstances. Nobody's touching that Athanasiou contract, but man, for a team that desperately lacks speed and scoring in their bottom six, you could make a case. And with Mantha, I'm just looking ahead. He was having a pretty good start in Calgary. His underlyings were great. He was putting up actual stats. And again, he's a gifted offensive player. He's not going to play all this year, and he's a free agent at the end of it. He might be pretty cheap.
He was going to probably be the belle of the ball at the trade deadline.
The story for Mantha is the same everywhere he goes, where it's like you look at the underlying numbers and you're like, wow, the impacts are great. And then every single fan base that's watched him is like, yeah, the underlyings are great, but the eye test is going to drive you insane because you can see the talent, but it just doesn't translate.
I'll still argue a lot of guys were experiments in Detroit that didn't work out. Obviously, Athanasiou for obvious reasons, Zadina for obvious reasons. Mantha, when he was traded for really good value. Let's not forget that. It's not like they gave him away like they had to with some of these other players. Mantha's the one player I will always argue. The eye test looked worse than the results because of how he skated. He was such a big dude, had such an upright stance. He won a lot of races to the puck. And yes, don't get me wrong, his effort went in and out.
Because when it was out, it was bad.
But that was the same thing with Johan Franzen. The similarities between those two were very, very stark.
Johan Franzen scored, was it 9 goals in a series against Colorado? He actually backed it up.
Yeah. Mantha had heaters like that. Now, he never got to play in the playoffs with his team, but...
No, but the thing with Franzen, I agree. Franzen, like, his face made it look like he didn't give a damn. But he showed up. Mantha scored at times, but when Mantha's effort went out, it was bad. Like, the people who were like, Mantha doesn't try, they were validated for periods of time there.
Oh, I agree. But his heaters were heaters. When he was on, he was on. But my ultimate point with him obviously having this reputation around the league, him having the strong underlyings, him having a good start with Calgary before the injury, now he's going to not play the rest of this contract year. So his counting stats at the end of the year are going to be bad, and he's going to be coming off an injury. You might be looking at a guy you could pick up for $1 million or $2 million in free agency, and you throw him on the third line right now. I don't care about the effort. I'll take that 100 out of 100 times. I'm not ever putting him on the first line ever again. But
clip it.
But
first line,
yeah. But if the Red Wings need some cheap depth scoring next year, this looks like it might be a prime candidate.
If my most old school hockey take is if Anthony Mantha was brought up in the WHL rather than the Q, he would be an
100%.
Oh, you might not be wrong on that one.
400%.
Anyways, interesting. Okay, so Pavel Datsyuk was officially inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame. A nice speech, not to be like obviously we've seen Pav, and English isn't his first language, and he's kind of like, you think of Gino and how they talk. Like, he doesn't love long form speaking in English, but he always has a good, he gives it like a good effort and always does well to try. Did well with his speech.
I thought it was great. I can't even imagine what it would be like as someone who's English is their first language, how terrifying that would be, let alone your second or third language. Yeah. I thought it was really well done. He did a great job thanking everyone. It was exactly what he needed to say.
It was there's a lot of like, oh, wow, this is a different era. And of course it was a different era, but, thanking all the players of old, thanking Babcock and Ken Holland. And like, this was a long time ago. It made me feel really old, but it was a nice ceremony overall. And, we've talked a lot about Datsyuk, and I love seeing the highlight reels play, and I'm going to continue to do that. It just made you really nostalgic. Looking forward to the future, though. We all bring this up within the context of you wish Zetterberg could have gone in with Datsyuk because they were the Euro twins. You mentioned on a previous episode, Brad, people forget, like, yes, the Sedins are like the duo, rightfully so, that everyone thinks of as like those with the magic connection on the ice and did crazy things. But, right behind them is Datsyuk and Zetterberg. And I wonder how tough this is going to be for Zetterberg to get in, because Elliot Friedman did a great job to point out there's a big pool of players who are eligible next year, and there's a limit of 4 male inductees. Zdeno Chara, Ryan Getzlaf, Duncan Keith, Carey Price, Joe Thornton, and they still have McGillney waiting. They still have Kachuk waiting. They still have Cujo waiting. Zetterberg, like, there's a litany of guys who are waiting to get in. I don't know if Hank will be soon.
Chara, Thornton, Keith, Price, slam dunks, right?
Yes.
There's your 4 next year. So Zetterberg's going to have to wait another year. And don't get me wrong, I love Hank, and in my mind, he's a no doubt Hall of Famer, but I don't think he's going to be ranked ahead of any of those 4. I don't think I would put him ahead of any of those 4. So he'll have to wait probably for a down year, and it might be another 2, 3, 4 years. I think he'll get in just because, the Hall of Fame, one of the requirements is you have to have a stretch of your career where you are amongst the very best in the NHL. Now, they have been softening that criteria a lot lately, given some recent inductees, but Zetterberg 06 to 2010 was a top 5 player in the league. So, and he's got the Conn Smythe to back it up.
If you win a Conn Smythe on a team that good, and your team almost won the cup again next year, even though 2009 never happened, he satisfies that condition in my mind. Zetterberg is not like, the Osgood case is a lot more. There's a lot of good advocacy for the Osgood case, but it's not the same. Like, Zetterberg was at the top of his game among the best players in the world when he was, especially in the postseason.
So who might be the biggest proponent for getting Zetterberg into the Hall of Fame? Sidney Crosby.
Yep.
After that 08 run, just pull up almost any quote from Sidney Crosby saying, I put a poster on my wall. I had to be better than that guy because that guy was the best player on the planet that year. I had to be better than that. And you have one of the greatest players of all time acknowledging that Zetterberg was the guy at that point in time. That's not nothing. The only thing with the Hall of Fame that gets tricky, someone's got to bring that up. Like, the people who vote on that probably don't remember that quote because Zetterberg was such a low-key guy.
Seems like a job for the Winged Wheel podcast.
And we'll do our best as social media influencers.
Oh, I'll do my part. But
I'm doing my part.
There's Evan over there not tweeting. I didn't do.
Wow, that worked out way too well. How many people who went on to Blue Sky, because we have accounts. We're still working out whether we can manage yet another platform. We're going to do our best, but the amount of people who screenshotted the fact that the podcast account posted a couple things, Brad's account posted a few things, my account posted a few things. Evans doesn't even have a profile picture yet.
No, it does not.
No, my favorite thing was in the middle of the game last night, because I was copy and pasting everything from Twitter to Blue Sky. I was keeping track of both. Let's check my notifications on Blue Sky. Oh, the Winged Wheel podcast followed me.
Yeah, well, I thought about it and I decided, it was worthwhile. Anyhow, continue with the Zetterberg campaign.
Yeah, he was such a low-key guy. He doesn't jump to the front of mind for a lot of people because, again, you look at Zetterberg and Datsyuk in their primes. The stats, very similar. It wasn't like Datsyuk was light years ahead of Zetterberg. They were right there together. The year they won the cup together, Zetterberg got the Conn Smythe, not Datsyuk. But Datsyuk has the highlights that people still play over and over and over again. As good as Zetterberg was, he played a very simple game in terms of, what you would see on highlights. It wasn't like he was toe dragging guys or
not as much, at least.
Not as much, yeah. So Zetterberg's biggest issue is just going to be getting his name in front of the committee, because when you dive into it, his case is very, very strong. He's got a much stronger case than a lot of guys who are already in. Hell, the biggest argument to put Zetterberg in is Datsyuk is in, right? Just because they were so integral to each other and their results were so similar. But yeah, if you're not just right there at the front of mind, it's hard in something like this.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Crosby, because that's going to transition us into our NHL news here. The Pittsburgh Penguins there's going to be a fire sale soon. It seems like the runway is over, and there's this pull back and forth between, the obvious, which is between Rutherford and Hextall. Their cupboard is bare, either through necessity to extend the window with Crosby, Malkin, Letang, etc., or because they just made bad trades. But you got to start. And unfortunately, Crosby, Malkin, Letang is not enough to carry them anymore. And Crosby wanted to keep this going. He didn't want to tear it down, because he knows he's not going to be playing long enough to see through what a rebuild is in the NHL anymore. But Pittsburgh has shown this for years. They've had flashes where they've outperformed it a little bit. They've had flashes where they've been really, really bad, but they're trending downwards. And now it seems that Kyle Dubas is, whether he's just acknowledging it, personally, I doubt that. I think he just has the authority to do so because ownership promised Crosby a competitive team. He's acknowledging that pretty much everyone but Crosby maybe is for sale. I don't think you're going to see Malkin move here, but Pittsburgh, if they want to do anything while Crosby is still playing, is going to have to be drastic here.
Yeah. Here's the problem, and this is such an obvious problem to point out, and keep in mind you have to factor in contracts of the players. Is there anybody outside of Crosby and Malkin on the Penguins who has any value? How many players right now on Pittsburgh?
Marcus Pettersson.
Chris Letang shoots right.
And he's not been great this year. Karlsson regressed this year. Even Malkin and Letang, as good as they are not who they are.
Karlsson hasn't regressed. He's as bad as he's always been on defense.
Did you? I don't know.
He's not scoring 100 points in a year.
Did you guys see that quote? I can't remember who said it, but they're basically like putting Erik Karlsson on the Swedish Four Nations team is a mistake.
If you care about defense while he's playing, I don't know that I believe that. I think what he can generate on offense, and based on who's behind him on defense, I don't know that Sweden has enough to justify not putting him on.
Yeah, you put him with Edvinsson, he's elite again.
But yeah, Karlsson is a forward and a defenseman's jersey. That's it.
Yeah, and which you can absolutely tolerate when he's putting up 80 to 100 points a year, which he's not doing this year. Again, Brian Rust, good player. Look at that contract. Wouldn't touch it. Malkin, even as good as he is, how many teams are going to take that contract at his age? Letang, nobody's touching that contract. And the rest of the team isn't good.
Rickard Rakell's had a bit of a resurgence after a terrible year. I don't know what his contract is off the top of my head, but
not great.
He may garner some interest from teams, but I mean, I'm not jumping.
But
he's at $5 million a year for 3 seasons after this.
Oh boy,
yeah,
nobody's touching that. If you took Rickard Rakell at $2 million, 1 year left, and you say, hey, we're going to grab this guy for the Red Wings to help out on the third or second line, all day, 100%. I would not second guess that. At that contract, I wouldn't take him for free. And this is the problem Dubas faces, because he's obviously going to get a lot of criticism, but really, what can he do? You want to rebuild and get futures? There's nobody giving you futures for what you have. You want to retool on the fly and maybe just bring in a different mix of guys? Nobody's touching these contracts. He is stuck. They got a 3rd round and a 5th round pick for Lars Eller. That's about as good as he's going to do on a trade right now. I think Pettersson is the other guy where he can get some tangible value in return. But teams that are acquiring a player like Marcus Pettersson are not giving you up a roster player. They're going to give you futures because they need Marcus Pettersson for the right now. So if he can somehow wiggle his way out of this with Pittsburgh looking anything close to respectable, it'd be the greatest GM masterpiece in the history of the NHL, because what the hell can he do?
I'm not a Kyle Dubas apologist. I think a lot of what the Leafs have right now in terms of their contract woes is because their superstars walked all over him, and he made all the wrong moves, especially in terms of term. Forget money, term. But yeah, when I saw the kind of people upset with Dubas, I was like, oh, there's more Hextall, and before that, Rutherford. Like, I don't know a GM in the world that could come in and fix this.
The second he got hired, I think all of us, to a man, sat here and said, wow, why? Why would anybody want this job right now? Maybe, again, there's only 32 jobs, but oh boy, he's got his work cut out for him, and you got to feel for the guy.
No, he's getting paid pretty handsomely.
That's a terrific point. Yeah.
Okay, so other players across the league. As you guys know, one of my favorite pastimes is not caring at all about whether or not this is likely. I just like stirring the pot. And I see young right shot defensemen struggling, and I say give. Not because it's going to work for sure in Detroit, but imagine one of them does, and you get them on the cheap. Jamie Drysdale in Philly. What's going to go on there? And Yzerman in Columbus. Now moved down the order with Fabro there. You know, it's been noted before that that's a Kekalainen pick, and there's been tension between Yzerman and the organization before, and does Waddell want to deal with that? Send him over. Send him over. I understand Detroit has ASP in the pipeline, and you bring in a project, and the project's not guaranteed to work, and what if, you know, you give up assets and they just turn into like a middling defenseman who eventually fades away and isn't on your team in 5 years? That is the most likely outcome for any project in the league. Don't get me wrong, but if there's a trick being missed by a different team here, I want everything to do with that. Because imagine you were able to acquire, let's say New York was a bit stupider.
Which one?
The Rangers a few years back, and they let go of Lafreniere when he was looking meh under Gallant. Like, that could have been a haul for some team. I want one of these young defensemen, fair or not.
I'll preface everything I'm about to say with this. If you can get good players for a reasonable price, always acquire good players and figure out the rest. That being said, I don't think either of these guys are going to be traded for what would be considered a reasonable price for two reasons. One, because they're young, and two, because they are right shot defensemen who always come at a premium. Drysdale specifically, I feel like, again, relative to what he costs, would be a bit redundant with ASP coming through, because they are going to fill a very similar role, and they are at least close enough stylistically that it wouldn't make sense to give up a premium pick or another premium prospect to bring Drysdale in, whereas whoever you're giving up is likely at a position of bigger need right now, right? Like, you're not going to trade Danielson for Drysdale when you already have Seider and ASP and you have a bigger need for centers. I think Yzerman makes a lot more sense because he wouldn't play the ASP role. And you can come up with a formula where if you have Seider, ASP, and Yzerman down the right side, you can go a little cheaper on the left side because you have an anchor on every pair. And because stylistically him and ASP are so different, you can absolutely slot them both in the lineup comfortably. Again, my ultimate thought on this comes down to the Red Wings in the pipeline have much bigger needs at other positions. So if you're giving up premiums to acquire someone like this, it's probably better served elsewhere. But I will circle back to, if the cost is reasonable, always acquire good young players.
Yes, that if it's better served elsewhere, but I don't know. Like, is there opportunity elsewhere? Like, I think you need to just consider, like, is this perfect? No, but is this an opportunity where we believe in that player based on whatever our scouting is, and we think there's more to him? Screw position. You just acquire good players. What if Detroit went from, oh my God, they are destitute, they are absolutely lost in the desert without Seider on the right side, to they have a wealth of options on the right side, and they have one of the most valuable positions in the league. And they have then, what's their issue? They have an asset to deal, right? Like,
well, it comes down to what you're giving up. So if you're a team in Philly's position, they probably don't want picks where they're at. They want a player, or a player who's close to ready. Who is that in the Red Wings system?
Well, I believe John Tortorella would love Andrew Kopp.
He'd love Carter Mazur.
Would you consider that?
Oh, they would never, ever in a million years do that trade.
No.
We all three of us think very highly of Carter Mazur, and I think he's going to be a really good middle six scoring winger in the NHL who's going to bring a lot of sandpaper. That's very valuable. I don't think that's his reputation around the league.
Yeah.
Right? That's what comes down to, is what does everybody else think of him? And the people who don't live in Red Wings world and Griffins world like we do, he's not a big name. He's not a marquee name. Drysdale and Juracek are.
Okay. I'm just saying, like, there at some point, and I say this all offseason, but at some point, if you're the Red Wings with no lottery luck and, free agency doesn't give you more options other than just, traps for bad contracts, take a risk somewhere, trading for a young player. I'm not saying it has to be one of these two options, but as these options come up and go by, I think the teams that take these risks are rewarded in a way. And you know what? The prices aren't that high, I find, in trades, really. Because at the end of the day, you get in the room, these GMs are negotiating, and they're saying, look, you can't be asking for a first-round pick plus for a guy who's playing 9 minutes a night and was healthy for, half of last season kind of thing. So I just think it's an idea worth exploring. But it's all fair points in terms of what's actually worth a premium. Elsewhere around the NHL, quick notes, the coaching carousel it's going to start at some point, and the names that are out there, Joe Quenneville, McClellan. If Boston moves on from Montgomery, I think someone's going to jump all over that. So if you think that's of relevance, then something to keep an eye on. But I think even if it's other teams, like those are going to be the names you're going to see. And then as well, Ken Holland, the guy who just can't quit hockey, has found a position with the NHL being a hockey ops consultant. I think that is the ideal job for Ken Holland. Good on him for loving the game that much and not wanting to let go. And, think what you want about Ken Holland as a GM. Like that's actually a really great get for the NHL.
Oh, 100%. He's not really the greatest hockey mind in terms of how to build rosters in the cap era, but I deeply respect just how much this guy loves hockey and wants to stay in it. So something like this, yeah, I agree. It's perfect for him. Happy to see it. And like I said, I just love the love of hockey.
He's been around the game his entire life, right? Like you don't let people like that just exit this type of industry. You keep them on, whether it be in a limited capacity where you just need to call them up on things or get some ideas from them. I think it's the perfect spot for Ken Holland.
Anyone who's worked in an industry with, a lifer there who has so much institutional knowledge, does not matter what you think about them. You don't let that go for nothing. You need to keep that knowledge. And then as we approach, conversations about a future CBA negotiation and what's going to happen there, a couple things that have come up here I think are interesting. I wonder if the GMs are actually going to go down this route of, wanting to shorten the max deal, because it's been mentioned before of 8 years, maybe shortening that to 7, and whether they can get the PA to agree to that, I'm not sure. These are the kinds of conversations that are going to start to come up, and I'm interested to see if they go that route. I don't necessarily hate that either. It creates a little bit more movement in the league. Yes, it stops you from locking in your best guys for longer, but it also stops, anchor contracts for bearing you as long, and it creates more transfer of players and excitement. So whether or not it's likely, I don't know, but that would be an interesting move.
Sorry, my eyes glazed over when you said CBA negotiations, and I had some flashbacks there.
It's all very peaceful so far. There's no heat or anything.
So far, so good. No, I'm a huge fan of reducing max length on contracts because the NHL in the salary cap world has created more parity, like the league was hoping, where more markets, more teams have a chance at winning the Stanley Cup. But the downside of it is it's become so cyclical and the cycles are too long. Maybe we're just sensitive to this as Red Wings right now because we've been on both extreme ends. Good players have to become available more often so bad teams can have a chance of getting out of the basement, not wallowing in a rebuild for 10 years. I would like the max length of a contract to be 5 years, personally, which absolutely is not going to happen in the CBA. We'd be lucky to get 7. But yeah, if you go even, let's call it 6 years, how many times have we been sitting here as a team, as a fan of a team in the basement going, this superstar is available. We shouldn't sign them because they're 29 years old and they're going to get 8-year deals. If it's 5-year deals or 6-year deals and they're 25, 26, 27, you know who's going to benefit the most? The players and the fans, because we can sit here and go, yeah, that guy's 25. We can sign him until he's 30. Pay him every damn dollar we have available. Go get that guy. And there's not going to be this stupid gymnastics of, yeah, we have no good players, but we probably shouldn't get that good player because that good player is going to be bad very soon.
We'll see. It's a long-term conversation, but as we approach, over the next year, if they even wait that long. These are the points that are going to slowly bubble to the surface. Not as aggressive as years past. I'm hoping that holds in the CBA process is relatively amicable this time. Last point here, and this is just a shout out to St. Clair Shores, Michigan native, massive Detroit fan. A lot of people know him as Uncle Joey, but Dave Coulier announced that he's been diagnosed with stage 3 non-Hodgkin lymphoma, which is a type of blood cancer that starts in the lymphatic system. So just sending all of our love. I know all of Detroit and Michigan and a lot of people out there are showing Dave their support. So I just want to acknowledge him and just say that, Red Wings fans, Detroit fans everywhere are behind him and are thinking of him right now. Okay, let's jump into overtime on this episode of the Winged Wheel podcast.
We're going to overtime.
Overtime is brought to you by our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast if you want to support the show. Again, the overtime bonus episodes, the giveaways, including 2 tickets to every Detroit Red Wings home game, the Discord, and lots more. You allow us to do things like host Winged Wheel podcast nights in partnership with the Detroit Red Wings and the Grand Rapids Griffins. You allow us to do other great content like having Max Bultman of the Athletic Detroit on as a contributor. Expected by Whom, hosted by Sean Shapiro and Prashant Iyer. You allow us to support the Jamie Daniels Foundation. By the way, Hot Stove Stories, rounding the bases with Mike Tirico and guests, Tuesday, January 14th. Tickets on sale. Go to jamiedanielsfoundation.org. So again, patreon.com/Winged Wheel podcast if you want to start supporting the Winged Wheel podcast. Let's take some questions from our patrons here, and let's start with one from 155 Taters. I love that name. It says, has your excitement for Kasper being a full-time Red Wing diminished with his lack of production on the score sheet, or are you confident he will do what he did in the AHL by starting slow and then having a great second half?
This is almost exactly what I was expecting. This was the criticism, although that feels too harsh. This is the criticism of Kasper. Great 200-foot player, brings a lot of elements to the game you love, but is the offense going to be massive? And for the most part, the answer has been, it should be okay, but it probably won't be anything special. So I ultimately expect him to probably be a 40 to 55 point scorer in the NHL. So yeah, his first year in the NHL is probably not going to be at that pace. So if he's on pace for 20-ish, 25 points this year, probably about what I would have expected.
Yeah, we'll see. Like, I even think with the benchmark you set there, like, that's a really good outcome for Kasper. So you're not over the moon. Like, you're not, writing letters home about how amazing Kasper has been, but he's shown really well, and the expectation for a player of his caliber and what he's going to bring to the lineup on this Red Wings team was never going to come in and produce a ton of points. So yeah, I wouldn't say diminished. It's just a realistic outcome so far. Kalamazoo Lefty says, how much of Chara's game can Edvinsson realistically replicate? They are both big and they are both talented at, both ends of the ice, but Chara's a unicorn. Edvinsson is too to a degree, but I think Chara was he's going to go down as one of the most legendary in the game. So there's similarities, but there's also some pretty stark differences.
I know it's only a 3-4 inch difference, but there is a substantial difference between a very tall hockey player.
There's a lot of the big difference in the 3-4 inches, Brad.
Depending who you're talking to. But
stupid. We're so stupid.
But there is a difference between being a very tall hockey player and the tallest hockey player of all time.
Yeah,
Chara instilled fear in people like few others. And the fact that he also happened to be really good at hockey, the definition of a unicorn.
Clint Benesh. This one's you're testing Red Wings fandom here, Clint. Says, let's say the Penguins and Crosby decide that his last gift to the franchise would be that he is willing to be traded. 1, what would the Wings have to give up to get him? And 2, what kind of boost would that be to Detroit's end-of-year standings? 3, we would be in a world where both Kane and Crosby wore the winged wheel. That almost makes you want to throw up. I'll start by saying this. Crosby being traded would be a gift to future Penguins rebuild, but for the current team, it wouldn't just be the on-ice product. Their income would tank.
Let's not forget, they were on the verge of moving because they had a 6-month stretch where they didn't have a top 10 player of all time and the team almost moved. That fan base was as fair weather as they came. So that is a very real risk for them if they have no reason to show up to the rink anymore. to what it would cost the Red Wings, we'll call it 3 premium assets minimum. A first-round pick, your top prospect, and then they're going to pick something else they really, really like. And that's for a 37-year-old. So should the Red Wings do that? No, obviously not for that reason. But how would it affect them this year? Oh, they're a playoff team, no doubt. Can you imagine? What's their biggest issue right now? The second line. Copp and Comfer just ain't it there.
Can you imagine Sidney Crosby and Lucas Raymond on the same line?
Can you imagine Sidney Crosby and Patriock Kane on the same line?
Oh my God.
They wouldn't even need to break up the first line.
I don't tell that to 2009 Evan, he would throw up and die.
I'm so close to doing it.
But yeah, there's no reality where if he gets traded, there's 15 other teams ahead of Detroit on that pecking
It's going to be to Colorado. He's going to play with McKinnon. You're going to do it at a conference.
He's not going to get traded. That's
Joke's on you. He goes for a different East Coast guy, and he goes to Boston.
Ew.
Evan, what's your problem, man?
Monkey paw curls.
So everyone knows Evan's going on vacation for a few episodes, and so this is what he's leaving us with. Just the most disgusting things he could say out loud.
I cannot wait until something happens in the LA game, and then on the Sunday episode, you say something really stupid.
Yeah.
And I make fun of you about that for the remainder of the season.
Evan, you know what's going to happen. They're going to win all 3 of these on the road, and they're going to continue to win after that, and you're going to come back to the Red Wings not having dropped a point since.
They're going to be like second in the division. You're going to have planned the parade.
Not the parade, but I will have our schedule out for our playoff content.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's going to be all your fault. Brad and I are intentionally going to go off the rails while you're gone.
I know.
You're going to have to message Max and say, hey, while you're on for good in the room, try to keep them on track.
I will try my best.
Godspeed to you. AJ Voss says, imagine hearing Edvinsson with the overtime winner from DeBrincat and Kane back in 2021. Speaking of things that would have twisted your brain back then. Tyler Bigelow says Kasper, Berggren, and Raymond needs to happen. As much as it would kill me to see Raymond on the third line, would there be any advantage to have Raymond playing on the second or third line with Kasper and Berggren against a weaker team like the Ducks or Sharks? By no means a demotion to Raymond, just an opportunity to find the back of the net and get the monkey off their backs.
I'm at the point, their first line is so good, I don't want them to touch it the rest of the season. DeBrincat, Larkin, Raymond. It works. Don't touch it. There is no combination of other 9 forwards you're going to have that's going to be good. That's just the reality. It's the roster they have. However, I am very much over watching Patriock Kane drown with Copp and Comfer. I'm not saying you need to get both of them off his line, but please, anybody with some offensive instinct needs to play with him. I want to see Kane, Kasper, Berggren personally. Defensive question marks be damned. The way Kasper and Berggren are playing, they can at least move the puck around in the offensive zone. Tarasenko has his moments, but he's been struggling, and Comfer and Copp they're on a rough stretch right now. So I would like to see that, but I understand the logic behind why you wouldn't.
I'm very okay with, lines that aren't working, moving things around until you find something that does. And I am a firm believer that with this version of the Red Wings, you are not going to find a full 4-line, 3-pairing set that's going to work day in and day out. It's just not a good enough team for that. So things that are necessary to keep together at this point, Seider and Edvinsson, you know that. The top line, by and large, you don't want to mess with that too much. But things that are working sometimes and maybe not, you can pull them apart to try to find a solution. I agree, Raymond has to get scoring. I've celebrated how Raymond has started the season with good play, but at some point the results need to come. And so if you have to get creative to get that going, then by all means. But I don't know. It's going to be a shifting goalpost all year with this team. They just don't have the personnel to have a solid top to bottom 20-man every game.
Kasper Berggren needs someone on their line to unlock them from a production standpoint, because I think we would all agree that watching them, they are noticeable every single night for positive reasons, but the numbers just aren't there. So is that, a Patriock Kane on their line? Is that a Lucas Raymond? I don't know, but it would sure be fun to experiment a little bit to see if you can't unlock that production.
And last comment here, Fat Yoshi 5 says another great showing from Talbot with him putting up a .939. He currently has a .927 save percentage on the season, with Kosa currently sitting at .935 in the AHL. I'm excited to hopefully see the tandem of them next year. Also remember what is going on in the Red Wings pipeline with Augustine and other notable goalies. People are going to take notice. If Detroit has Talbot going, if Detroit has Lyon going, if Detroit has Kosa and Augustine, who are both top tier goalie prospects, that is going to be something that Detroit is going to be able to weaponize. We talk about how does Detroit pull themselves out of a hole of never having lottery luck and needing high-end players. I wouldn't be surprised to see a top-end team who has the luxury of dealing premium assets to try to get a solution in net do something drastic with Detroit. And I don't know if it's for a prospect and I don't know if it's for a current goalie, but I could see it happening. And I'm thinking of Colorado.
You know, if you want to look long-term, do you know two teams that have garbage goalie pipelines?
Who's that?
Philly and Columbus.
It's what I'm saying, Brad. It's what I'm saying. Although at this point, in terms of what has more value,
Augustine for Juracek, yeah, there's an argument to be had there.
It gets interesting. Okay, we're going to wrap up this episode of the Winged Wheel podcast. Thank you all so very much for tuning in. We are going to be back with you on Sunday. We'd like to thank all of the sponsors of the Winged Wheel podcast, all of our Patreon supporters. We could not do the show without you. Patreon.com/Winged Wheel podcast if you want to support the show. And if Patreon's not for you, you can support us in other ways. Wherever you're listening to your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, subscribe, leave a rating or the thumbs up on YouTube. Tell a friend about the show. I also know that Spotify and Apple Podcasts have been having their own issues with the show. These are issues localized to those apps. So usually what helps is if you delete the episode and re-download it or unsubscribe and resubscribe. We are working with those companies to try to fix the issue. It's been widespread across multiple podcasts. So apologies for that. We are hoping to get that resolved for you soon. To all of our Patreon supporters, again, you're amazing. And to our name level supporters on Patreon, you are absolute heroes. Arjun Shankar, Yves Bartels on behalf of the Sarah Grand Foundation, Aikfer, Samuel Soderholm, Icon, Alexander Hansen, Ghost of OSBP, Glenn Brabham, Croner's Left Knee, Ashley Whitehead, Sea Lion, Matthew M. Rice, Adam Rose, Adam Zuiza, Admiral Matt S. of the Cheesebag Navy, Asher Killian, Beer League Legend, Best James Bond, Carl Brutinnen Nanalewski, Carl Provy, Citizen High Five, Clip Clop Nene, Connor Scovey, Craig Kibble, David Martin, Denny's Gamer Girl, Derek Enstam, Cider, Dickens, formerly Marlon Winchester, DJ Denton, Eric Hill, Gin and Yusi, Give Blood Fight Probert, Goose Looney's Drinking Club, Griffin, God Creatives, Hockeytown Love, Hockeytown Matt, Hassam Al-Qassem, Jay Gollum, Jacob Turner, Jeff Pridemore, John Ingalls, Jonathan Miller, Kaylin Wood, Marcus, Matt Keeler, Matt McKay, Marty, Michael Edlund, Mr. Kuzi, R.A., Riley Enright, Roy Donk, new name level supporter, Ryan Britt, Scott Martin, Simon Says, Pickleball Sucks, Just Played Tennis, Dork, Skeletor, Stephen Ordeleb, That's What I Appreciate About You, Wallman's Elite Dancing D, Iserplan Stan, Aaron Hudson, General Andy Bohan of the Cheesebag Army, Sam Bankson, A.A. Ron, A.B., All Motor No Hands, Ann Stanislavski, Antonio Gracias, Axel Sandy Pelka, Bellingham Acid Balls, Bex, Chimkim Nutgits, Commander Ben Baird of the Cheesebag Space Force, Connor Layton, Corey Prida, Darren Fick, Datsyuk's Dangleberries, Deep in Seider, new name level supporter, Dylan Larkin, Trade Sacrifice, Eric Nance, Frank Stanley, Gene Sullivan, Golf Sucks, Grepsky, Griffey Boy, James Pridemore, Jeremiah Dobo, Jim, JM Rhapsody, Joey Jojo Shabadoo, Josh Yelton, Chaotic Monkey, Keenan O'Donohue, Casper the Unfriendly Ghost, Kevin McCracken, Quaz, Larkin's Loyal Lemming, Les Grossman's Ungodly Firestorm, Linda Hull, Lucas Raitmond, Ophelia, As Good As It Gets, Ryan M, Steven, That Other Guy, The Hodag, The Hat 123, Trent Thorough, Wings fan in St. Louis, Scott, and your second favorite patron. Thank you all so very much. We have to go hold Evan's hand as he goes through security at the airport.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to visit wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you'll find links to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find ways to support the show, like Patreon, official podcast merchandise, and more. And don't forget to follow us on X at Winged Wheel Pod, at Ryan Hanna, WWP, at Brad Crisco, and at Hockeytown Evan, as well as Winged Wheel Podcast on Instagram.